Julian Price is a very quiet man, tall, impressive.
I believe he came here with the intention of giving a lot of his money away.
He could have just gone to Europe for the rest of his life or whatever, but instead he chose to invest in a community. He chose to do something with it.
It wasn't just that he was a philanthropist, it was this that he came in and he irritated people, but they liked him.
People who worked for me called him the Wizard of Oz because they didn't believe that he existed.
I'm in awe of the fact that he had that ability to think that big.
Here comes, who is it? Rachel Price.
My dad was, he was definitely a quiet guy. He had some contradictory traits, for sure. He was quiet, but he was hilarious.
In fact, this is the daughter of the lien holder, Rachel. Gosh, she is short there. Just a tiny little thing.
He actually liked to make little films at the beach, faux interviews with people. He was very playful, for sure. Man on the street, man on the beach interviews, which were funny.
I don't know who the cameraman was on this action, but very incompetent, and we'll deal with that person later. This is an interview with the phone.
He was darling and funny and clever and smart and kind. Oh, I was smitten. I met him at the food co-op. I had just come out of a dance class. Julian Price and Jim Samsel were out there. I didn't know Julian at the time. And Jim introduced me to Julian, and I thought, wow. But he had this twinkle in his eye.
Julian Price was heir to a significant fortune from Jefferson Pilot Insurance. His grandfather had been president of the company in the early years, and Julian had spent much of his life on the West Coast and is on his way back to North Carolina, passing through Asheville, and like so many other folks, falls in love with the place and decides to invest his considerable wealth in the city.
He came back to North Carolina, which was his roots, but he just couldn't manage going back to Greensboro. So he's looking around for a place to go.
He ended up in Asheville at one point, and he was walking down Walnut Street, right down here, which on on his left was the building Malaprops is in now, and that was empty. Roger McGuire owned that. And on the right is this beautiful building that we're in now. And it was beautiful back then. It was empty. He was walking down, and in the distance he could see Bowcatcher Mountain. And he burst into tears. And he didn't know why, but he knew that he had to move here.
Lost in the blue velvet rain.
Why did Julian choose Asheville? It is a small town.
By 1929, the only city that was bigger than us was Winston-Salem. Our books were audited. We thought we had $5 million in the bank. It turned out we had 18,000. That's how we entered the Depression. So think about the people that were here that were just left with this ghost city and impoverished. I can understand why they have some sort of reticence toward their downtown, because their downtown is psychologically tied to those 1920s. So that's the culture that Julian was rubbing against.
He knew from the get-go that he wanted a livable downtown. He'd studied enough about what makes towns great places. He knew he wanted people to live down here, which was a crazy idea. It was boarded up, the streets were empty.
This was caused by the opening of the Asheville Mall in the early 1970s. This is not a story unique to Asheville. It happens all over the country. Even big cities, New York and Philadelphia, were crippled by this movement of retail to the suburbs. Or small businesses just began to collapse because there's not enough of a critical mass to support them anymore downtown. Such that by the late 1970s, much of Asheville is boarded up, There's a couple of pawn shops, a few porn stores, a porn theater, and otherwise a lot of empty buildings.
Wall Street was empty. There was a little clothing store. There was pretty much nothing.
In the late 80s, there were a lot of buildings that were closed, empty.
There had been some businesses that kept going.
Stuff antiques, the open door.
Tops for Shoes, Bob and Ellen Carr were great pioneers that stayed downtown even during the worst of everything.
Vic and Green was here.
The stores were getting broken into and things stolen because there weren't people on the street. That's what they call eyes on the street.
As an heir to the Jefferson Pilot insurance fortune, Price could have lived anywhere, but his apartment was above this store.
The city had been trying to bring downtown back for years and years. In the 80s, when Lou Bissett was the mayor, Doug Bean was the city manager, and Leslie Anderson was the downtown development director, they really tried to bring downtown back. They put in 2 parking garages, which was critical to downtown, even though nobody needed parking garages back then. That was very visionary.
So now you had all these buildings that now had access to parking. That $26 million that the public put into downtown, $26 million, grew that $100 million asset to $500 million. So that's a $400 million return on a $26 million investment.
After all of this was going on, people said, let's don't tear our city down. Let's keep what we have. Let's focus on preservation. Enter at that time Roger McGuire. Roger was the retired executive vice president with Southern Living magazine.
Roger, in many ways, was just as important to Asheville as Julian was. He did some different things, but he invested his money in the community as well, and Roger and Julian were good friends.
One way to help build a community and a sort of critical mass was to have a cultural center. So he helped start Pack Place Arts Education and Science Center, which opened in 1992. When it opened, it helped attract restaurateurs and shops.
Roger McGuire recommended that Julian give me a call. Julian called me and suggested we go out to lunch, and just because he had some ideas. He came to me and said, Pat, I've been giving money away to nonprofits, and I've been doing that for years, but I'd really like to change the approach a little bit. The idea would be to engage people who are really trying to do things in the community, renovate some of the buildings in downtown, and see if we can have a little more impact. Instead of going out and living in a new subdivision out on a farm or out on a mountain, maybe people would like to live downtown.
2 things are really important in all this, both from Roger's work and from Julian's work. It begins to build a residential core where no residential core had existed before.
If you believe that a city should be livable, then you got to have affordable housing downtown. Their first project that they did was the Carolina Apartments that had actually caught on fire. Everybody was saying we need to just demolish that and start over. Public interest projects took a look at it and they said, no, we're not going to tear it down. That's one of our cornerstone ideas. We need a place that people can afford to live and be able to walk to amenities downtown.
We'll make it a nice place to live. We'll put a little urban garden in the courtyard, and let's see what happens.
Most people, if they have any sense, they're going to want to develop out in suburbs because it's easier, it's less expensive. But Julian was committed to making downtown a better place for everybody.
At the time, people thought they were nuts.
4 months before it was even ready, it was totally leased out.
Probably the stories that most resonate were those many occasions that Julian was known to come in and leave a check.
He approached me pretty much out of the blue at this lunch counter that we had at the YMCA. I used to see him all the time. He was very shy, very quiet. And one day he came up and said, do you think you'd be interested in expanding the restaurant? And I remember hiding behind the lunch counter and calling Joe and saying, some guy just came up and said he wants to help us expand the restaurant. Joe was like, oh, that sounds fishy, you know.
Laughing Seed was the first business that we invested in. And Joe and Joan had a lunch counter at the Y, and Julian went to the Y, and he thought the food was good. And then all of a sudden, Pat's talking to them.
He came in, he looked at me and said, Joe, look in my eyes. This is my card. Come to this meeting on Tuesday at 3 o'clock. And I'm like, okay, okay.
We bought a building on Wall Street, and we renovated it, and they ran it. And Joan's food was great, but the restaurant lost a lot of money. I was trying to get advice from other people who did business investments, and people say, oh, it's been a year and a half, it's been 2 years, you just need to close the business and go on to your next project. And that wasn't, number one, Julian liked the restaurant. Number two, we could see that the restaurant was bringing in people. They didn't have some fine tuning done so that they were profitable instead of losing money. So we stuck with them, and we did kind of whatever it took.
I mean, Pat, he wasn't trained for this. He came out as an attorney, right? He was just so smart and so persistent.
They kept making improvements and have been profitable ever since, and we're a great success.
It was around 1991 that Julian Price, who I did not know, walked into my office. He was just standing and asked questions, and at some point I said, well, that's very nice what you're doing. I like it. Would some extra money, say $20,000, help you? And I said, well, sure. And he said, I'll write you a check. I'll bring it by later on. I think maybe in an hour or two, he just kind of walked in and handed me this check, and that's how I met Julian.
Whether it was breathing life into an old building or helping friends with a project they were doing, Price did a lot of the work and took almost none of the credit.
Julian's idea was, I'm going to find the creative people who I think are helping make it a more livable downtown, a healthier community. It was like he took his wounds and decided to make it his own hero's journey. And when he did that, it was as though he was telling everybody that he gave money to that you too are being a hero. I see the heroic effort you're going through.
Before I met and worked with Julian, I think I'd always envied people who had that kind of family wealth, and realizing that for really good, introspective people who have that kind of wealth, it can be a real burden. I think he felt that because he had been so blessed that he had this huge responsibility to do the right thing. And I think when he was growing up, he felt quite judged. One time we were having lunch at the Laughing Seed, and Emma was in one of those slings. And you know, when you have a baby and their heads are right here, I kissed her on the head all the time and had no idea that I was doing it. And Julian looked over and he said, you know, I think if my mother had kissed me on the head like that, I would have been a different person. And, you know, it's still, you know, and it just made me realize, like, you know, money is a wonderful thing, but it is not everything. Public interest projects had this laundry list of businesses that we wanted to see in downtown Asheville. And one of the things that we had in Asheville was this amazing little independent bookstore, Malaprops. We were renovating the Asheville Hotel, which is the big building on the corner of Haywood and West Walnut.
This was declared by the federal agency as a hazard because of the pigeon poop.
There was going to be this like 5,500 square foot space on the main floor, and our dream business was malaprops. Emeka is, I mean, she's amazing. She loves books, she loves the written word, she loves free speech.
I was born and raised in Budapest, Hungary. I came to the United States as a political exile. Downtown Asheville at the time that I got here was pretty boarded up. Anywhere you went 3-4 blocks in the vicinity, there was really no stores, nothing happening. But I could afford rent, so I opened up the store in 1982, June 1st, 10 a.m. The space was really an issue after 15 years, and I was thinking, what am I going to do? What am I going to do? And one day, in walks a gentleman and says to me that I have a friend who is going to buy the building on the corner if you move into it. And I said, are you God sent? He said, here's the key to the building, go look at it. Once Julian Price came into our life, which was 18 years ago, that we moved into the bigger space that he, thank goodness, provided for us. I can't really tell you why Julian Price chose to help the organizations and the businesses, but they are all still here and are a key component in the city of Asheville.
We also worked with Hector Diaz, who at the time had a little lunch counter at Salsa's. And in the early days, there would be a line of people. And I think he had maybe 3 or 4 stools, and that was the seating. And he couldn't get anybody to invest any more money. Nobody was going to bet on him. But we sort of thought, if there's a line out the door, maybe this is a good idea.
I was born and raised in Puerto Rico. I came to the United States at the age of 11. A friend of mine brought me to the mountains, and I said, wow, this reminds me back home. This is awesome. My thing is about making food, taking care of the community. Adios, adios, adios. I believe it was Pat Wayne came by and said, we could help you to expand. And I said, I might need like $85,000. That's like a big chunk of money. And he said, I think we could do that for you. Meantime, I didn't even know that it came from Julian. But one day I was up in his office, and I saw him coming into the office, and I said, hey, Julian, how you doing? He said, I'm doing wonderful. And then Pat Wayne said, Julian is part of helping this situation. He's the one really helping you doing this. It's his money. And I said, wow. So I looked to the side and said, thank you, Julian. That's a very nice thing that you are doing for me. I appreciate you, you know? So I was very lucky to meet a wonderful man. He was a pioneer of making this town what this town is today.
Julian was trying to find himself when he came back to Asheville. He was still on a journey to heal himself and get in touch with who he was to the point where he could feel comfortable that he had done what he needed to do in the world. Some people would say, well, I want to be an artist, I want to be a race car driver. Julian wanted to do something for the world. And in order to dream a better town, he had to people it with more dreamers.
Once he got us to agree that we would allow him to loan us money, was take me on a walk downtown going, what's your dream, Joan? What's your dream?
He was giving money to people who promoted individuals following their dreams. And that's how we end up with an Asheville today, full of individual, creative people trying to do something and maybe everyone else would say is impossible. They said, well, I don't care, I'm going to try it anyhow. Julian told me it might work.
It's amazing the resources that are available for a small business to start up in Asheville.
Banks weren't really doing much to help the community, so he brought the self-help credit union here, which is one of the most remarkable and forward-looking credit unions in the country. And in order to entice them here, he bought them the building.
He had already promised the self-help credit union he'd give them a building, and he'd renovate the building for them. Julian's deal with them was if he would renovate this building for them, that they would open a self-help credit union office here in Asheville.
They give money to underserved populations, whether it's minorities, women, startups that banks won't help.
Well, I was the director when Julian came to Asheville, and we had a small office on 12.5 Wall Street, just down the street. Julian came in one day and made the maximum deposit that one person could make by federal regulation, and I kept my cool and tried to be professional. And I called Durham's like, what do I do with it now? I'd never seen a check that large in my life.
It was a great gift he gave to Self-Help Credit Union. It was a very large gift. It was well over $1 million.
Self-Help Credit Union is following in that kind of soulful, grassrootsy approach that Julian loved.
And a lot of those businesses that really created downtown Asheville were funded by Julian. I mean, Cafe on the Square, the Blue Moon Bakery, French Broad Food Co-op. Well, they were through loans from Self-Help.
Through loans through Self-Help.
Right.
He made a deposit in order to allow us to make that relaxed type lending. So we were able to make loans to those individuals that would not traditionally get those type of loans.
Among the things that he did, he had a multi-pronged approach to making a better town. One of them was he felt he had to educate people.
He knew that part of advocacy was having the stories told, and so he invested in the in-depth reporting that came out of Mountain Express.
He invested in the company that I was running through public interest projects, and that's the first time I met him, because they invested in Skyrunner, which was this startup high-speed wireless company, because his whole intention with Skyrunner was to create high-speed internet for downtown Asheville, way ahead of anybody else. You know, no other city had it.
I'm just recognizing the importance of communication to bring about these changes.
So that's why he walked in, I believe he walked into the office and said, well, these people clearly are troublemakers, and I want to cause some trouble in this town.
He was so inspired by all the reading that he did, and he wanted to share that with other people.
I remember he would, at times, use a big word intentionally when I was a little kid, and I wanted to know what the word was, and he would just say, look it up, you know. I just remember that being a persistent kind of feature of my childhood.
He had the most amazing library of books that all about social justice and the environment, and how those two things are so tied in with the economy.
The lessons that he gives us as an example in his life are really important. Making all the money is not the answer. If you don't have a good environment, what are you going to do with all that green stuff, you know?
Julian was different from most philanthropists I've run across. They want to give the money, they support the work, but they want you to run off and do it. He not only got into the weeds of the work, he dug down in the ground and got in the roots of the work.
Anything that was going to make Asheville a better place to live, he was passionate about that.
We would do things like plant flowers at Pritchard Park. He'd come out and help us plant flowers there. And he's a very quiet man and a little shy, but he liked people a lot.
He contributed with every aspect of his breath.
Julian was a big pedestrian activist, and he was very effective.
Some people say he got a bunch of city council members, put them in wheelchairs, and asked them to roll around town over the curbs to show them just how difficult it was.
He used to send pictures in of intersections that were not handicapped accessible.
He was the one that, you know, rented the wheelchairs. We were all out there. So it was really funny. That's one thing I want to bring up, that things were really funny. He had a really good sense of humor, and a lot of times you'd be doing something pretty serious and it would just be hilarious because he was so clever the way he handled it.
Julian didn't think there was something too small or insignificant or unimportant for him to deal with. If the bench was broken, he would fix it. If there was graffiti, he would clean it.
Julian really helped with litter and trash and the way that the trash is serviced downtown.
Just drive him nuts because the trash cans would be overflowing, and one time he came in and he was so happy. Meg, I found a rat on top of the trash can.
He had a little newsletter that he put out, and so when the next issue came out, right there on the front page, picture of the trash can with this big rat lying on top of it. And they started picking up the trash more often, which was his goal to begin with.
John Cram came to us. He had already done New Morning Gallery, and the Fine Arts Theater, which was an old adult X-rated movie theater, had been closed at that point, was right next door to him, and he wanted to reopen it as a movie theater. Again, we're looking to add as kind of anchor businesses, the downtown, malaprops, the restaurants. Movie theater was obviously something we wanted to add to downtown, just like the grocery store was something we wanted to add, and we helped the co-op, and the bakery was something we wanted to add.
I think about the attraction of the orange peel and what it's done across the country, planting trees and getting people to care about their environment. Those are not singular kind of visions. They're a huge spectrum for a whole community to look at. I also think he made other people change. I would love to think that I make a difference in the world today in a different way because of the influence he had in this community.
So how did Asheville go from a boarded up town in the mountains to the #1 destination in the country? We live in a world with national media that promotes stereotypes. And people want a level of authenticity.
There's an article that Julian writes in City Watch in the fall '93 issue. He's trying to get people into the mindset of fix your buildings. Let's start there. And the Arthur Frommer's quote is, "Among cities with no particular recreation appeal, those that have preserved their past enjoy tourism. Those that haven't receive no tourism at all. Tourism simply doesn't go to a city that's lost its soul." It's just like, boom, mic drop.
Asheville is exceedingly individualistic. It's full of individuals with dreams. That's a very unusual thing.
In a way, he's trying to stir people to have some sense of pride in their community. He's just saying, please, just respect your soul, your community, your heart, your architecture. 15 years after he published that, Frommer's magazine in 2007 would list Asheville as the #5 place in the country to visit. Just this last year, we were listed as #1. For me, that's an amazing story, that he would have that kind of vision and positive attitude. It's like, come on, we can do this,
He would not say, and certainly I would not say, that he did it all himself.
We had Leslie Anderson, who gave her life for this. We had all the others, Roger and Julian. They had a belief.
It's all of the people that he chose to work with that were all doers, that were all doing stuff. Anyone from Susan Roderick to Pat, anyone involved with any of the businesses. These are all people that want to do something for the broader community. It's not about themselves, it's about having a broader sense of self.
There were lots of great people who have been involved in bringing Asheville back, but the story of what's been done here in 20 years, it's 25 years now, is really pretty amazing. When he got sick, he was 60 years old. I remember he met with me that summer, and he was kind of funny. He was a little bit depressed. He did get depressed sometimes, but he said something like, I feel like I've done everything I need to do. A month or two after that, they diagnosed the cancer. We had the idea of going around to all these different projects and getting people to write a letter. We got to put together a big book because he had done a lot of big things in Asheville, and I gave it to him. Finally, one day I went and he said, "Pat, I've looked in the book, and just like you, to tell everybody thank you from the bottom of my heart.
First walked upon the land, and our story was barely new. Before I touched your hand, I saw the light true. So
Philanthropist Julian Price died of cancer on Monday.
You know, it was really hard for all of us during that period because Julian, you know, was such a kind and loved person.
Well,
I mean, he really did change our lives, you know. I really don't think we'd have the Asheville we have today, you know, without him.
Julian's legacy is he cared a lot about making a difference and doing the right thing. He wanted to know what you cared about, and he wanted to see if he could help.
He would be, I think, pretty stunned to even see what's happened.
So Julian, I want to take you on a walk downtown because it is so amazing. You may have been here already and seen how it is, but just in case you don't know, what you did was good and that what you did was worthy, and it made a really big difference in the lives of everybody. Thank you for that.
Past is just a passing ghost. What is it that hurts? If the shadows of what was, they no longer grace the earth. If freedom is forgetfulness of half the things you heard, or what is it that holds on to your world? Well, I know it's a weighing oh so heavy on the kindness of your heart.